The forest was alive with soft rustlings and the occasional hoot of an owl, the ground slick with fresh rain as beams of moonlight filtered through the dense canopy. Dr. Lena Park pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders, casting a wary glance back at the others. They were just a handful, a ragtag group, each clutching flashlights and tools, drawn out to this remote forest by an inexplicable call from their friend, Max. "Lena, you won't believe this," Max had whispered over the phone. "You have to come. I don't even know how to explain it." Now, here they were, standing around what looked like the smoldering remains of a crash. Trees were snapped in half, scorched earth spreading outward in a perfect radius, and at the center lay something, or rather, someone, utterly alien. The creature lay sprawled amid twisted, broken metal, armor fused to its body and emitting a soft, rhythmic hum, like a heartbeat echoing through alien circuitry. Lena's breath caught. Even in the dim light, she could see the being's skin, a silvery texture shimmering in shades of violet and steel under the moonlight, and its face, stern yet strangely graceful, with features that looked both eerily familiar and entirely foreign. Whatever this creature was, it wasn't human. But as a doctor, all she could think about was the wounds, the scorched flesh, and the labored rise and fall of its chest. "Do you think it's alive?" whispered Marcus, the engineer. His voice held both awe and trepidation, a sentiment that rippled through the group as they leaned closer. "It's breathing," Lena replied, steeling herself as she stepped forward. "Which means it's alive. Or close to it." The alien's eyes snapped open, sharp, predatory, with irises the color of molten silver. The gaze it cast upon them was full of disdain and fury, and Lena felt a jolt of fear freeze her in place. The creature made a sharp, guttural noise, which she quickly recognized as a warning. It wasn't pleading or asking for help. It was threatening. "Hold on, we're not here to hurt you," she said, raising her hands slowly. We found you like this. We want to help." The alien's gaze narrowed, skeptical. It watched as Lena knelt down, her hands hovering just above its wounds, unsure how its body would react to touch. She looked back at the others, her face pale but resolute. "Help me turn him over," she said, nodding toward Max and Marcus. As they lifted the alien, the creature winced, shuddering with pain, but held silent. The silence was unnerving, stoic in a way that bordered on unnatural. They laid him down gently, and Lena started to assess the damage. Her fingers worked with practiced ease, though she could feel the weight of the creature's gaze on her, watching her every move with wary intensity. The creature spoke, its voice a low, gravelly growl. "You are wasting your efforts." It startled her, the words thick with a strange accent but understandable. She glanced up, meeting its intense gaze. "You're wounded. You need treatment," Lena replied firmly, keeping her voice steady. The alien's lip curled in something that might have been amusement. "Humans, always so naive. There is no point. You are insignificant." Lena exchanged a look with Marcus, who rolled his eyes. "Well, excuse us for trying to help," he muttered, turning away to rummage through his backpack for a med kit. But Lena didn't flinch. She ignored the insult, focusing on the alien's wounds, using her antiseptic and gauze with care. Even in the strange landscape of the alien's anatomy, she could recognize pain, injury, and, perhaps, hope. The creature's flesh was strange under her hands, like pliable metal overlaid with softer tissue, but she moved with the same calm care she would give to any patient. "Why would you do this?" the alien asked, the scorn in its voice fading to curiosity. "I am nothing to you." "Maybe not," Lena said, shrugging. "But you're hurt. And it's just, well, it's what we do." The creature blinked, clearly thrown by the answer, but it didn't argue further. As the night wore on, they continued to work, making sure he was stabilized. The alien lay silent, his pride clearly bruised by needing help from such insignificant beings. By morning, as light crept through the forest, Lena and the others had learned a bit more about their alien guest. His name was Erike, though he didn't elaborate further, and he made it painfully clear he was not here by choice. From what they could piece together, Erike had once been a decorated warrior, a champion, he claimed, but had been exiled by his own people for reasons he did not divulge. Max, ever the optimist, was fascinated. "So, you're, like, some sort of hero? And they just threw you out?" Araki's eyes flashed with indignation. "They betrayed me. They feared what I had become." His voice was laced with bitterness, a stark contrast to his earlier stoicism. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Guess even aliens have their dirty politics." Erike said nothing, but his expression suggested grudging agreement. Lena couldn't help but feel a twinge of empathy. Exiled, betrayed, left for dead by his own people, she could hardly imagine the strength it took to survive that alone. Over the following days, Erike remained wary but watched the humans with a guarded curiosity. Their compassion baffled him. He saw them sharing food, laughing even amid the tension, offering support without asking for anything in return. The concept seemed foreign to him, and at times, Lena would catch him studying them with an expression she could only describe as bewilderment. On the third night, Lena sat by the fire, nursing a cup of coffee, while Erike lay nearby, quietly observing. "Why do you act this way?" he asked suddenly. "You waste your resources, your time. Your species is weak. Fragile. Yet you behave, as if strength lies in kindness." Lena took a long sip, considering her answer. "Maybe strength isn't just about who's the toughest, or the strongest. Sometimes, it's about helping each other get through things, no matter how hard it gets." She glanced over at him, meeting his gaze with a steady calm. "And maybe that's why we're still here." Erike frowned, clearly unsettled, and turned his gaze to the fire. He didn't respond, but something in his posture seemed to relax. Lena couldn't say for sure, but in that quiet moment, it felt like a small bridge had been built, tentative and fragile, but there. As the group settled down for the night, none of them noticed the faint whirring noise in the distance or the barely perceptible glow in the sky, growing closer by the second. The collective hadn't forgotten their exiled champion, and they were coming to collect what they deemed theirs. Unaware of the danger closing in, the humans huddled around the fire, and, for the first time, Erike found himself leaning just a little closer, feeling something he had long forgotten, a quiet, fragile hope. The forest was cloaked in the shadow of night, the fire's embers barely casting enough light to reveal the shapes of trees and underbrush. The humans huddled closer, keeping quiet as the faint whir of engines grew louder overhead. Lena's heart pounded, a cold dread twisting in her gut. Erike had warned them of his people, the Shi'ar collective, and what they might do if they found him here. He described them in words that painted a picture of silent, ruthless precision. And now they were here. Erike, crouched beside Lena, had shed his characteristic disdain. His gaze was locked upward, unblinking, his face tense and strained. This wasn't the proud warrior they had met. This was a hunted man. "They're not here to negotiate," he murmured, barely audible. Marcus's hand tightened around a long branch he'd sharpened at one end, hardly a weapon against whatever advanced technology the aliens wielded. But as the ex-military man of the group, he wasn't about to be caught unprepared. "All right, everyone, we stick together," Marcus whispered, addressing the others. "Lena, you're on medical. Max, stay close to the fire and keep an eye out. I don't think they'll just barge in, they're looking for something specific." "Me?" Erike scoffed, though his voice held no humor. "They are looking for a fugitive." The first burst of light hit the ground several feet away, illuminating the forest in a sharp, unnatural blue. Lena felt her pulse quicken. The light was sterile, probing, as if even nature itself was under scrutiny. The trees around them appeared frozen in that light, the forest floor now a field of ominous shadows. As the beam shifted closer, Marcus gave a quick gesture, and the group scattered silently into the foliage. Lena followed Erike into the brush, her breath shallow as the collective's drone descended, its sleek, silver form gliding between the trees like a predator on the prowl. "This way," Erike hissed, pulling Lena deeper into the shadows. The drone was tracking something, or rather, someone, with unwavering precision. Lena watched it with a mixture of awe and horror, realizing that despite Arakiai's warnings, she had never truly grasped what he meant. The technology wasn't just advanced, it was calculating, merciless. "You think you can stay hidden?" Arakiai's voice was tight. "They will follow us anywhere. You should not risk yourselves. And let them have you." Lena whispered back fiercely, her gaze hard. "Not happening." Arakiai's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. They waited in tense silence, watching as the drone swept across the campsite, the light narrowing into a blade-like focus. And then, with a small, almost organic twitch, it turned, hovering inches above the ground, seeking movement. In a flash, Marcus sprinted forward from the bushes, waving his makeshift spear. "Hey! Over here, tin can!" The drone shifted instantly, locking onto Marcus. It emitted a rapid, pulsing sound, and Lena's heart skipped a beat as a sleek metal arm emerged from its side, a blue-tinged blade extending toward him. Marcus dodged, slipping between the trees, ducking low, and weaving through the foliage. He wasn't trying to attack it head-on. Instead, he was leading it away, forcing it to adjust constantly, its mechanical eye tracking his erratic path. The others watched, breath held, as Marcus ducked and wove. "Let's go. While it's distracted." Lena hissed, tugging on Arakiai's arm. Max and the others followed, slipping deeper into the forest, using the terrain to shield them from the drone's relentless surveillance. But Lena noticed Erike glancing back, his expression filled with something she couldn't quite identify. Regret? Guilt? "Marcus will catch up," she said softly, reassuring him as much as herself. Arakiai's eyes were dark, yet something within them seemed to soften, even if just for a moment. "You, humans, your loyalty is baffling." "We don't abandon each other," Lena replied, voice low but firm. "That's not something you'd understand." Erike was silent, as if the notion itself were foreign, unimaginable. But their escape wasn't unnoticed. As they moved, a second drone appeared in the distance, sweeping low across the forest floor. This one, however, wasn't alone. Following it was a contingent of tall, lean figures clad in gleaming armor, their movements unnervingly smooth. They walked with a rigid coordination that made Lena's skin crawl. The group huddled in the dense underbrush, watching as the Shi'ar soldiers passed by. Each held a small, sleek device, scanning the ground with precision. Lena could see Erike tense beside her, his gaze flickering over the soldiers, his fists clenched. "These soldiers," he murmured, his voice strained. "They are among the collective's best. Trained since infancy. They will not stop." Max, his usually jovial face grim, leaned closer. "Then what are we supposed to do?" Erike looked away, his expression hardening. "If you value your lives, you will leave." "Fat chance," Max replied, trying for a bit of bravado despite the trembling in his voice. "We're not letting you go out there alone." As the soldiers moved away, Marcus rejoined them, panting but unharmed. "That was close," he muttered, catching his breath. "Those things are persistent." "More are coming," Erike warned. "And these ones are not mere machines. They are flesh and blood, trained to track and kill." "So we outsmart them," Marcus replied, jaw set. Erike raised an eyebrow, doubtful. "They are not easily outwitted." Marcus's face broke into a grin. "Then we'll have to be cleverer than they are, won't we?" Erike seemed to hesitate, thrown by the human's audacity. And perhaps, Lena realized, he was questioning his own beliefs. Humans were supposed to be weak, insignificant. But here they were, standing shoulder to shoulder with him, willing to face what he himself had fled. The group moved quietly through the forest, Marcus leading them with a strategist's eye. He used the dense trees and natural obstacles to create a maze, a path designed to mislead and confuse anyone who might follow. Meanwhile, Max and Lena used strips of cloth and pieces of equipment to create false trails, scattering traces to divert the Shi'ar soldiers. By the time the Shi'ar contingent reached the area, the humans had already repositioned themselves behind a cluster of thick trees, holding their breaths. Lena felt her pulse pounding in her ears as the soldiers arrived, halting in clear confusion as they examined the contradictory tracks. Eric stared at the scene in quiet astonishment, his gaze flickering between the soldiers and his human companions. "You used your own belongings to create these false trails?" Max shrugged. "Better than letting them find us, right?" The alien seemed to process this with visible difficulty. "Where I come from, such tactics would be dishonorable. Here, it's called survival," Lena whispered back, keeping her voice low. "You don't fight just to look noble. You fight to win. And if that means getting creative, then so be it." Eric absorbed her words, his gaze thoughtful. He had been trained to view strength in absolutes, power, dominance, unyielding force. But these humans, they were relentless, unpredictable. They adapted, changed their approach on the fly, even if it meant abandoning convention. As the Shi'ar soldiers struggled to interpret the mixed signals, Marcus gave a signal, and they began their silent retreat, inching backward through the dense foliage. They moved with careful, silent steps, watching as the aliens grew more disoriented, their frustration evident in the faint shifting of their rigid movements. By the time the humans were safely away, Lena saw something unfamiliar in Araki's expression. Respect. It wasn't loud or obvious, but there, beneath his stoic gaze, was an acknowledgement of the resourcefulness he'd just witnessed. "Perhaps," he murmured, almost to himself, "strength lies not in how you fight but in why." Lena met his gaze, her face breaking into a quiet smile. "Welcome to humanity." The forest was eerily quiet, thick with anticipation as the small group moved cautiously through the underbrush. Every footfall felt like it reverberated through the air, and each breath was measured, almost synchronized as they pressed on. Lena could sense the tension among her companions, the same tautness that she felt tightening in her own chest. This wasn't just evasion anymore, they had slipped from hunters into prey. And it was only a matter of time before the Shi'ar forces would realize the trick and find their real trail. Ahead, Marcus slowed, scanning the path ahead. He gestured for everyone to gather close, his face set in grim determination. "We can't keep running. They'll catch up eventually," he murmured. "We need to make a stand. Here." Lena's stomach twisted. The clearing around them was secluded but far from fortified. It felt too open, too vulnerable. But there was no other option. She glanced over at Max, whose usual optimism had faded into a nervous focus. Even Eric seemed uncharacteristically tense, his gaze flicking to the sky, where the faint glimmers of the drones circled, like silent sentinels waiting for their moment to strike. You intend to fight here?" Araki's tone held a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been respect. Marcus nodded, surveying the landscape with a soldier's eye. "We've got one advantage, they don't know how we think. They'll expect us to keep running, to hide. But if we hit them where they least expect it, we might stand a chance." Araki's brow furrowed, his gaze narrowing. "The Shi'ar do not underestimate their foes lightly." "Good," Marcus replied, eyes alight with a fierce spark. "Then it'll hurt them that much more when we win." They worked quickly, moving with the efficiency of people who had survived on little sleep and adrenaline alone. Lena and Max set to work constructing traps, improvising with branches, vines, and whatever materials they could find in their bags. Marcus sketched out positions in the dirt, directing each person with quiet authority, a natural leader emerging under pressure. Eric watched with a mix of fascination and skepticism, his gaze flicking between the humans' makeshift defenses and the drones overhead. He shifted, clearly uncomfortable, and Lena could sense the struggle playing out in his mind. For so long, he'd fought with the collective's elite forces, with strategies born of superior technology and disciplined precision. Here, they were using sticks and rope, mud and grit. Lena caught his eye, her face softening as she saw the flicker of doubt there. "Sometimes the best weapon isn't what you have in your hands," she said quietly. "It's what you're willing to fight for." Eric hesitated, as if the thought unsettled him. He nodded, though his expression remained conflicted, as if her words had touched something he didn't yet understand. By the time the Shi'ar forces appeared at the edge of the clearing, the forest felt electric, charged with the weight of what was about to unfold. They moved with calculated precision, the alien soldiers sleek and intimidating in their armor, their faces hidden beneath mirrored visors that reflected the world back with cold indifference. Eric stiffened as he recognized the insignias on their chests, a mixture of rage and bitterness hardening his features. He turned to Marcus. "They will attack without mercy. The Shi'ar do not retreat." "Neither do we," Marcus replied, setting his jaw. He motioned for everyone to hold their positions, and for a brief moment, the clearing was completely silent, the calm before the storm. The Shi'ar advanced in a seamless line, their weapons humming as they powered up, emitting a cold, metallic buzz. Lena's pulse hammered, and she could feel the sweat on her palms, her fingers tight around the rope that would release one of the traps they had set. Max stood beside her, face pale but determined, his hands gripping a heavy branch that he'd fashioned into a makeshift club. Eric moved to the front of the group, his body tense, his gaze fixed on the approaching soldiers. He had made his choice. For better or worse, he was standing with the humans. The first Shi'ar soldier stepped into the clearing, and in that instant, Marcus gave a sharp nod. Lena yanked the rope, and the first trap released, a massive weight made of stones and branches that swung down from a high branch, crashing directly into the lead soldier. The soldier staggered back, momentarily stunned, and for a split second, the formation faltered. Taking advantage of the confusion, Marcus and Max launched themselves forward, attacking with a coordinated ferocity that defied the aliens' expectations. Lena followed, ducking low and staying agile, weaving through the chaos as the alien soldiers tried to recalibrate, their movements slightly delayed as they processed the humans' unpredictable strategy. Eric fought beside them, his movements sharp and brutal, his strikes calculated with a warrior's precision. But even he couldn't help but be startled by the humans' relentless energy, the way they threw themselves into battle without hesitation, their attacks driven more by will than by skill. He saw Marcus maneuver past a soldier's swing with ease, using the terrain to his advantage, ducking and weaving through the trees as if he were one with them. Max moved with a frantic speed, his eyes wide but fierce as he lashed out, each strike powered by desperation and a wild hope. Amid the chaos, Lena spotted a soldier bearing down on Eric, his weapon poised to strike. Without thinking, she grabbed a handful of dirt and flung it into the alien's face, temporarily blinding him. The alien staggered back, and Eric, momentarily stunned, turned to her, his face flickering with something like awe. "Why would you risk yourself for me?" he asked, his voice rough. "Because that's what we do," she replied breathlessly, a fierce glint in her eyes. "Now get moving." Eric didn't question her further. Together, they continued to fight, side by side, their movements synchronizing in an unspoken rhythm. The battle stretched on, each moment feeling like an eternity. The Shi'ar soldiers were relentless, but the humans met each attack with equal intensity, their bodies aching, their breaths ragged, but their spirits unyielding. In the midst of the fray, Eric felt a surge of something he hadn't felt in years, a purpose that went beyond duty or honor. These humans, fragile and ill-equipped, fought with a fire that defied logic. They weren't merely defending themselves, they were protecting each other, bound by something he could not fully understand. It was a strength that went beyond physical endurance or technological superiority. Finally, as dawn broke over the trees, the Shi'ar soldiers began to retreat, their movements stilted and sluggish, their ranks shattered. They had underestimated the humans, and it had cost them. Slowly, the clearing fell silent, save for the heavy breathing of the humans, exhausted but victorious. Lena sank to her knees, gasping for air, her hands trembling from the adrenaline. Max was beside her, wiping sweat from his brow, a shaky grin breaking through his exhaustion. Marcus leaned against a tree, his eyes fierce and triumphant, a small, victorious smirk on his lips. Erike stood among them, silent, his gaze moving from one human to the next. His people had seen him as a tool, a weapon. But here, standing shoulder to shoulder with these humans, he felt something new, a sense of belonging. "You fought, like warriors," he said, his voice filled with a newfound respect. Lena managed a weary smile. "We're just human," she replied simply. Erike nodded, a strange warmth flickering in his gaze. In that moment, he knew he could never return to the collective, not after what he had seen here. He was no longer one of them. And perhaps, for the first time, that thought filled him with hope rather than sorrow. The humans had not only saved his life, they had shown him a new way to live. The clearing lay still in the dawn light, the forest quieting after the frenzied clash with the Shi'ar soldiers. The exhausted humans gathered around a makeshift campfire, their faces worn but triumphant, their bodies aching yet alive with adrenaline. Even though they were bruised, battered, and low on supplies, there was a sense of victory that lingered in the air, a pride that felt deeper than any single battle won. Erike sat apart from them, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the faint traces of the Shi'ar's retreat could still be seen in the sky. He seemed restless, his posture rigid, as if caught between worlds. Lena noticed his silence and, with a quiet glance to the others, made her way over to him, sitting down beside him in the grass. "They'll be back, won't they?" she asked, her voice soft, almost reluctant to break the fragile peace. Araki's face was a mask of conflicting emotions. "Yes," he said, though there was a weariness in his tone that suggested more than mere certainty. "The collective will not forgive a loss, especially not against," he hesitated, glancing at her. "Against those they see as lesser." Lena bit her lip, nodding slowly. "And what about you?" she asked quietly. "What will you do?" Erike was silent for a long moment, his gaze never leaving the horizon. "In the collective, we are raised to believe in absolute loyalty, to submit to the will of the whole above ourselves. I was their champion because I embraced that without question. But now," he looked down at his hands, as if seeing them for the first time. "I do not know who I am, if I am not theirs." Lena placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're someone worth fighting beside," she said, her voice steady. "That's what matters to us." Erike looked at her, his eyes softening. There was a vulnerability there he'd never shown before, a crack in the armor of pride and isolation he had worn so carefully. "Among my kind, kindness is a weakness, loyalty an obligation. You, humans, you choose it. It is, illogical." "It's human," Lena said simply, with a small smile. Before Erike could respond, a faint beeping interrupted the stillness. He tensed, his eyes darting to the small device on his wrist, a communicator he had nearly forgotten about in the chaos. It flashed a pulsing red light, signaling an incoming transmission. He glanced at Lena, his face tight with worry. "They're sending a message." "The collective," he murmured, standing up and moving away from the group. The humans watched him, their expressions a mixture of caution and curiosity as he moved to a secluded spot and pressed a button on the device. A small holographic projection sprang to life, and a voice, low and imposing, echoed through the clearing. "Erike of the Shi'ar. Your failure to return has been noted. You carry with you the artifact, a weapon you are no longer trusted to wield." The voice held a steely edge, cold and indifferent. "You have been deemed expendable. If you do not return the artifact within the hour, we will send a strike team to eliminate you. And anyone, assisting you. The message ended with a sharp click, leaving Erike standing alone, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He clenched his fists, his gaze darkening. Lena and the others had gathered behind him, having overheard the threat. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice grim. So, that's it, huh? They'll kill us all if we don't give them what they want. Max shook his head, a defiant look in his eyes. We've made it this far. We're not just handing you over to them, Erike. Not after everything. Erike looked at them, disbelief flickering in his eyes. You would risk your lives for this, for me? His voice was thick with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Marcus nodded, his gaze fierce. We're not just going to give up. That's not how we're built. Arakiai's gaze shifted to Lena, searching her face for an answer. She met his eyes, her expression unyielding. You're one of us now, Erike. And that means we protect each other. No matter what. The words settled over him like a weight, grounding him in a way he hadn't expected. His hand moved to the small, pulsing artifact at his belt, its faint glow casting strange shadows across his face. He had once believed this device was his greatest strength, his ticket to victory and honor within the collective. But now, it felt like a shackle. Slowly, he unclipped it from his belt, holding it up for them to see. This artifact, it is why they fear me. It holds immense power, but it binds me to the collective, to the life they expect of me. He took a breath, his gaze steady. But here, with you. I am free. Marcus raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Then maybe it's time we make sure they never get it back. Lena stepped forward, her eyes meeting Arakiai's. What if we destroy it? Erike looked at her, startled. Destroy it, he echoed, his tone incredulous. The power within this artifact, it is beyond comprehension. Destroying it could annihilate everything around us. But if it's gone, they'll have no reason to come after you, Lena said. You could finally be free. And maybe, just maybe, it'll buy us some time. Erike hesitated, the weight of his decision hanging heavy in the air. He closed his eyes, remembering the faces of his own people, the life he had fought so hard to preserve. But when he opened his eyes, all he saw were the humans standing beside him, their faces determined, their loyalty unwavering. He nodded. Taking a deep breath, he adjusted the settings on the artifact, his fingers moving with practiced precision, bypassing security protocols that would have stopped anyone else. The device pulsed, a low hum growing louder as he calibrated it toward self-destruction. Stand back, he warned, his voice calm but resolute. The humans moved back, watching with tense anticipation as Erike held the artifact out, his gaze steady, his expression calm. As the device emitted a blinding blue light, he felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. This was his choice, his first real choice. And it felt right. With a final flick of his wrist, he triggered the sequence, and the artifact imploded in a burst of light, shattering into 1,000 sparks that dissipated into the air like stardust. The forest was bathed in a brief, radiant glow before falling into darkness again. The silence that followed was profound, the weight of the decision settling over them like a shroud. Erike sank to his knees, feeling the absence of the artifact like a phantom limb. For the first time in his life, he was truly free. Lena knelt beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. You did it, she whispered, her voice soft with admiration. Erike looked up at her, his face unreadable. I never knew I could, he replied, his voice a murmur. In the weeks that followed, the collective never returned, their interest in Erike fading with the artifact's destruction. The humans continued their lives, weaving Erike into their community, teaching him to adapt, to live without the shadow of war hanging over him. He was no longer the Cheyennear's champion, their exiled hero. Among humans, he had found something greater, an acceptance that required no sacrifice, a loyalty that was given freely. And as he looked around at his new family, he felt something he had once believed impossible, hope for a future he had chosen for himself.